And welcome back. Hopefully everyone has is full, and I know there's a big queue for the food there. So hope you managed to get something. And there was something left by the time you got there. I think there was. But thank you very much. It's great to see you all back here. It's been a great, I have to say, for the sessions this morning were excellent. They were inspiring but informative as well, and hopefully we can do the same. And I think we are taking off from where we left off in the last session, looking at I suppose, specifically arts, and we were starting to look at science, and even at the end, the questions towards the end of that session were considering scientific data and how that's used. But here, we'll kind of push it further, and we look at ideas around activism. And actually, I think it was something mentioned in the last session around quieter activism, or kind of stuff that's there by stealth almost. So we won't always look at the harder stuff. But we have some excellent. It's actually a tight squeeze here. We have extra people here for you in this particular panel, and I'll introduce you to them now. It's informal to a certain degree, and we're going to have a chat, I suppose, in that sense. But also, you'll see above us here. Hopefully, it's working okay. Images from some of the creative works from our panelists here. The idea being that it also involves itself in the conversation, whether it's the material world is represented by nature, or the creative aspects of which are some of our panelists here are involved with. And it's supposed to take part of the conversation. And if it's a bit intrusive, maybe that's the point in some ways. It is nature telling us we need to be intrusive about this, and we can't be too impolite. But actually, some of the imagery here is representing that. So let me introduce the panelists. We have just an hour, and we have lots to get through. But I would love to welcome you here. First of all, to my right here is Eileen Hutton, who is she's an artist and a visual artist and educator, and it looks at the reciprocal relationships with the more than human world, which we will be talking about, and the process create replicable models for informed ecological actions. So we will know Eileen a lot from the Burren College of Art, where she runs the Art Ecology MFA there, which also is aligned with the University of Galway. And she's a researcher and evaluator for an Urgent Inquiry series, which is a series of think tanks and sessions, and she has a residency there as well. Eileen is also a member of the collective called Roots for the Future, and that's been awarded an invitation to collaborate with the Irish Arts Council on Climate Art Citizens Assembly in 2026. So that'll be really interesting. Also, Eileen is a member of the Youth Ecology and Art Collective in association with the Butler Gallery in Kilkenny. Also here we have, and I'm going to the other end, is the panel here, Rebecca Wilson from Taida Éireann Research Ireland. Rebecca is the Science Week lead there, and has been involved with Science Week, as we know, and a lot of us will use it here as a flagship program for public engagement with science and technology. Rebecca's part of the ESG team there and involved in the sustainable research laboratories. Rebecca is also the public engagement lead for the Creating Our Future campaign, which you remember from a couple of years ago. And also before that was worked as a research center, ADAPT research center in AI-driven digital content. So a lot of the issues around with diversity, biodiversity, and diversity of all kinds, as well as sustainability. It comes under Rebecca's remit, and her background in marketing, innovation, and technology. But it's great to have the insight from Research Ireland here. Thank you, Rebecca. Also, we have here Alan James Barnes, neurodivergent environmental and audiovisual artist and curator, and festival maker. Produces highly interactive content with site-specific projects. And the projects that Alan has been involved with include Disrupt Disability Arts Festival, as well as Divergently Together in 2024-26, which is a National Creative Ireland Climate Action Project under its Our Place programme. And this is a collaborative space making visual arts project co-design along with adults with intellectual disabilities, and is also supported by the St. John of God's as well. And I believe, Alan, you're also going to be with us here in DCU as well as artists in residence, I believe, in St. Vincent. I don't know if that's to be announced, but I know of it. You're here already. I've been here. I can see you're here. Excellent. Brilliant. I'm breaking no confidences there. Excellent. Also here, Cathy Fitzgerald. And so welcome back to Cathy, because I remember from many years ago, I thought it was only 10 years ago. It was longer than that. Cathy was an artist in residence here in DCU. But since then, as well as being an artist, you're an eco-social artist and educator, and part of the Accredited Earth Charter program. So you look at this idea of monoculture and tree transplantation, but you also look at Hollywood Forest Story, which began in 2008. And you've also you completed your PhD in NCAD, which had a socio-political perspective on the challenges of collective ecological creative practice. And in collaboration with Nikos Papadakis, who is a Californian philosopher, you've also looked at this idea of ecoliteracy. So this is kind of the main part you're doing now is the Haumea University program, which you'll be speaking about, I think, in a short while, which is looking at how learners look at this idea of these brave spaces of creativity when we're talking about climate. And so we'll definitely look at some of those examples. And you're also part of the UNESCO endorsed Earth Charter for the Education for Sustainable Development program. And so the ideas of storytelling that was mentioned in previous sessions today, I think you'll have a lot to talk about there. And last but by no means least, and very close to home, Trish Morgan from the School of Communications as well, assistant professor in communications. You are a communications scholar, but also a geographer by training. What Trish does is she does a lot of the communication, environmental issues around interdisciplinary perspectives, drawing from geography and communications and looking at theory and practice-based approaches. Trish's perspective tends to come from political economy, but also urban political ecology, as well as human geography. And this idea of looking at transitional spaces around that is really important, as is the place of space, which was also mentioned earlier. Trish has been involved in 2 EPA-funded programs, and actually it's quite interdisciplinary because we've worked with the School of Physical Sciences here in DCU and also the School of Electronic Engineering. Okay, have we forgotten anybody? No, we haven't. We've got a full program. Even that has taken up loads of time, unfortunately, just going through all that. Thank you and welcome all of you. I'm going to start with you, if you don't mind, Cathy, just because we did mention you as an eco-socialist educator, an eco-socialist artist. Eco-social, what do you mean by that?
I didn't come up with the term, but I found myself when I was working on my PhD, which is an ecological art practice, that whenever I used the term ecological, they would sort of lump me in, Cathy, you're a nature artist. But I'm equally concerned about this being a social practice as well. So that was in the title of my PhD, eco-social art practice. Then I found other people referencing that term. And then I had a few people, some people may know Lisa Fingleton. She's a well-known person who's been a recipient for the Creative Island Awards, some of the big awards. And she said, Cathy, that explains me to a T. I'm an eco-social artist. So it's something that I think the ecological insights that are coming into education and arts, they actually are inviting us to rethink out the language that we're using. And I would be working with poets, and that I think language and values, they've even been touched on this morning, are so important that we need to reimagine education and art education in particular.
And the idea of literacy, eco-literacy, which we only touched on a little a while ago, and I suppose this panel is looking at science and the arts and activism. Literacy is a crucial part to what you're trying to do,
Yeah.
and this idea of eco-literacy.
Well, again, I came across, I was hunting for a word to convey that there is a big educational shift needed. I struggled through my PhD. I have a background in science. I've long known about the ecological emergency from the late 90s. I've worked with foresters. I have been doing rewilding before that was a word. So ecological literacy or eco-literacy, it just was a way I could put my developing curricula with my philosophy friend into a bit of a context. So it's not just about words, it's about also caring for creatives who are dealing with very confronting information. They go through art education and they don't have that way of being able to read maybe the scientific information. And I know even in my own work with establishing a permanent forest, when it got ash dieback, I suffered a lot of ecological grief. So I have an ethical responsibility in my little modest Haumea Ecoversity to provide holistic sort of practices that people and artists and educators that come to me go away feeling that they know how to support themselves in this work as well.
And tell me about the Haumea University initiative then.
So Ecoversity.
It's eco-university, but
So, but again, I was also looking for words. I saw an academic talk about it. And one of my learners said to me, Cathy, did you know about the Ecoversity Alliance? And I said, no. And they've just celebrated their 10th anniversary last week. So there is, I think, a groundswell of people who may not be in formal education, and particularly in higher education. They're seeing a deficit of a more holistic way of bringing education forward. So um, that's another term I just appropriated.
Excellent, thank you. Just so that eco-social word then, Eileen, so for the MA program in Burren and the College of Art in the Burren, is that something that resonates with you, the idea of eco and social being used in that way?
Oh,
It's complicated here. We're gonna be just a tangled mess in Umba.
It's very harrowing of us. Yeah, I suppose when I was thinking, I started the Art and Ecology Programme 11 years ago, and it developed out of my PhD as well. And I was looking at the term ecology specifically, and many of you know, like the term ecos derived from the Greek meaning home or dwelling, and Barry Commoner talks about one of the first laws of ecology is that everything is related to everything else. So a lot of that relationality is bounded in the program. We're very lucky to be based in the Burren, right? I think something like 249 acres are designated as special areas of conservation. We're part of the UNESCO heritage site in line with the Cliffs of Moher. So there's a lot of people in the Burren who are thinking already about stewardship and conservation, and it's a lasting legacy. And we're this small art college plonked onto the west coast of Ireland, very rural. And so it can be a challenging environment to be in the Burren, especially in the middle of winter, and how we start to, I think it creates a space for deep reflection, and especially like we have to reckon, I think, with what's happening ecologically and environmentally, as artists, and that space in the burn is kind of something that creates that. Um, the program itself is very place-based. You know, we're talking about the ways in which we relate to the natural environment, and in particular, special areas of conservation, the Burren limestone landscape. And it's based in eco-critical theory, right? So we need philosophers, we need thinkers to help us kind of challenge dominant narratives of what nature means, what culture means, a false binary that a lot of times is fed through curriculum, and then obviously arts practice. So it's found and it's rooted, that questioning, that engaging, is very much centered in and around how we are as artists. And it is because of where we are in the burn, it's rooted in community, has to be. We can't be isolated for the entire part of, like living in the burn. So it's located in rural communities, but it's also, we have strong relationships with Burn Bio and Burn Life Trust, and we're slowly building our relationships with Home Tree and Common Knowledge, um, yeah, and other citizen science community engagements that are active part of conservation stewardship of the burn. So it is very much eco, it's social. There again, it's not necessary that it's a binary, but it's kind of a holistic approach to kind of placemaking and artistic practice.
And there's so many different parts to that. I mean, the disciplinary part that you were talking about, Cathy, that was a challenge when you were doing PhD. So here you are joining I mean, disciplines, they don't disappear, but they have to be mixed together for this. The idea of literacy is a multifaceted thing for what you're, the kind of work you're doing, right?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I'd see it kind of like in a maybe like a three-prong approach, right? So there's the eco-critical literacy that we need to develop as artists. Not all artists who come into kind of a making practice would be diving into heavy philosophy, but a lot are, kind of in that mind space. So kind of how do we navigate that analytic mind alongside a making kind of feeling body artist. And then there's also how we read the landscape, the sensitivities I think that we've often lost when we're not deeply embedded in place, and how we cultivate it. So it's the mind, it's the body as well, and it's the making of it. Yeah, this kind of in response to where we are in the burn.
And this idea of feeling and seeing differently. Alan, if I can come to you on this, this is a big part of the work that you do, the ways of seeing and feeling maybe climate change and the different perspectives that are brought here.
I have. Thanks, Cathy. Yes. Just firstly, as a way of an audio description, I move my hands quite a lot for anyone who's visually impaired, and sometimes I take breaths and pause, and I kind of visually show that I'm taking a moment to process my thoughts. Different ways of seeing, I guess. To answer that, I can answer that from my own way of seeing, which is kind of growing up as a neurodivergent, queer, hidden disability or unknown disabilities in rural Ireland, where like nature, non-human nature, the natural environment was always something I could understand, where society and structures and rules that didn't make sense and don't add up and don't make sense, I can't understand. And there's also, I work a lot with in a kind of in the area of disability and climate, and how they interact and intersect, and how disabled people can support climate action. One of the amazing artists I work with is called David Parnell, who uses eye-gazing technology. They're non-verbal and non-mobile, and they write poetry through eye-gazing technology. And one line in their poems that really stands out to me in this kind of question around different ways of seeing and feeling. One of their lines is, "The trees don't stare." And a lot of disabled people, especially neurodivergent and a lot of disabled people have an affinity to non-human nature because of that. We feel like we are ourselves, we can be ourselves. Whereas in society, makes us feel belittled. But with climate degradation, access to nature for disabled people is becoming a lot more difficult. Oh, sorry. I have a lapel mic because of my stimming. But it can also yes, access to nature is becoming a lot more kind of difficult, and for people with disabilities, one of the projects that we're doing is called Divergently Together, which is funded by Creative Ireland and Research Ireland, working with disabled communities across Ireland. But one what always stands out to me is a person with a cognitive brain injury in Waterford, who now during the summer kind of refrained from going out a lot because of more intense rainstorm. When there's rainstorm when there's quick showers of rain followed by intense sun, which happens a lot more now in Ireland, the surfaces in Waterford become a lot more reflective, and their brain injury affects their vision. So when they go out, they can't distinguish a lot of things around the street, and all the little silver bollards or bollards that are around the street that don't really have any purpose. They keep walking into them at crotch height. This is just one example of so many. And just another stark contrast. People with lived experience and disability are more 2 to 4 times more likely to the mortality rate of people with disabilities are 2 to 4 times higher in extreme weather events than non-disabled people. But a lot of climate action and a lot of climate love forgets people with disabilities. Education forgets, conferences like this doesn't have loads of things all over the country. Policies, climate action policies are not in ISL, they're not in easy read format. There's no captions at events like this. If you are intellectually disabled or deaf, hard of hearing, vision impaired, access to knowledge is just significantly reduced. Okay, there's me.
Thank you, Alan. Trish, for the academic study of, again, we're kind of focusing a bit on the disciplines here, but eco-literacy has been mentioned, eco-sociality. And of course, it's a broad question because there's some, I mean, our center for time and society is in the humanities, the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences. So it's, it pervades a lot of what we're doing. But from your perspective, the academic study of science and art and climate science and art, where do you see some real fruitful stuff, basically, your own research?
Well, thank you. I would see it as, because I'm interdisciplinary, I see the silos, as were mentioned earlier, as being quite artificial. And in my own practice-based work, then that's an attempt to kind of de-silo some of this work as well. So in reality, and as well as I think Kerry said earlier, in reality, there aren't these hard borders between what is kind of human scientific knowledge and what is kind of so-called natural, that these are very porous categories. And I think environmental crisis is one place where those categories by necessity have to break down. We can't be in metaphorical kind of towers of ivory or otherwise about these kind of problems. So I would suggest that I even find sometimes difficulty with the word art, because it sort of puts this moniker on something that is intrinsically human, that's intrinsically part of our species being. So I sometimes think when you do have like calls for funding or something, and there's a little bit of something tacked on about art, I think that's a bit, it doesn't sit well with me. I don't necessarily think that's, I think it's too much of a binary to be really interdisciplinary. I'm also fond of looking at ideas of like neuroplasticity and things like that. 4/5 of the neurons in our brains are devoted to non-verbal processes, musical, physical, all of these other processes of interpretation and taking in and receiving and dealing with the world. So to think that we're some kind of top of an ecological pile and that we have superior knowledge through just data sets or something like that is a little bit of a false kind. It is a bit of a false binary. Having said that, it is absolutely wonderful that we have the scientific knowledge, that as human beings we can then communicate in all of these ways that like do make it about the magic of the planet that we live on, the wonderful elegance by which our planetary boundaries, just all 9 of them, just kind of, for the whole of the Holocene epoch anyway, have supported the development of advanced human societies. We know 6 of those 9 planetary boundaries are now being breached. So I think having that data, having that, like, if we still believe in facts, which hopefully most people in this room do anyway, we know that the crisis is systemic. We know it's on a planetary scale. But from that jumping off point of having wonderful science that's publicly accessible, the IPCC data is all publicly accessible, and a wealth of environmental data sets are as well. I think we can, from that baseline, also use all of the other wonderful, extensive ways of communicating that. And I think that's what's important, that not kind of one should be privileged over the other. I know what Robin Wall Kimmerer was mentioned earlier. If you haven't read Braiding Sweetgrass, it is an absolute scientifically based love letter to the earth and to traditional knowledge. So I don't know if that answers it, but
It does. It also, I'm so glad to see you still recognize Pluto as a planet. I do as well. So the 9 planets, unless you're talking about another planet, of course. Thanks, Trish. Well, Rebecca, so because we're talking about interdisciplinarity, and because of the new funder that is Research Ireland, which is now taking in the Science Foundation Ireland and what was the Irish Research Council. This means it has to be in the funding space. It means interdisciplinarity has to be, and with that, of course, literacy, different literacies within that.
Yeah, definitely. So for everyone to know, Research Ireland was founded from the amalgamation of Science Foundation Ireland and the Irish Research Council on the 4th of August last year. So we are Ireland's newest research funder. And with that, we're figuring out what this is going to look like. You know, the calls that were previously under the IRC and SFI, they're kind of continuing, but, you know, slowly adopting while we consult with the community, we talk with industry, with academia on, well, what works and what do we need? And I think this is, you know, the biggest part is we need to remember why we're doing this. And it's to serve the community, you know, both the research community and then from kind of the perspective that I sit in within Research Ireland in the education and public engagement. And ultimately, a lot of the research is for the public, you know, it's publicly funded research. And I think just to tap on what Trish was saying there of, you know, a lot of people in this room hopefully still believing in fact and that publicly accessible research, we want to ensure that that is with the general public, you know, who may not be in this room. So I don't know if people know the Science in Ireland barometer that SFI used to run, or kind of, it's been 5 years since it's taken place. So about 90, I think it was about 88% of the public said that they really believe in the value of STEM and they understand why, you know, we want to do scientific research. But 71% didn't feel like they were able to access it, or it was in a means that they didn't understand. So this is kind of where we come in the education and public engagement team, to really get that research that is for the public, that is solving the challenges or looking to solve challenges that are impacting them, that it's meaningful for them, that they can engage with it, so that they can, you know, feel empowered. And it's about kind of building that public trust and that empowerment. You know, we all know kind of come election season when people are knocking on doors, what are they asking for? And we want people to be asking for more research budget. And I think probably all of us in the room want that as well. So that, you know, when we build that in the public and we put that kind of front and center, it's on the front center of their mind. And we all know climate wasn't on the most recent kind of political agenda. There's been a lot of other things kind of cropping up. We want to show that actually climate and, you know, building that trust and that scientific literacy, that people will feel engaged and they understand kind of why it's at home. Kind of weave through loads of different points there. So how we do this in Research Ireland is through funding mechanisms mainly. So talking about, so Alan James mentioned he's funded under the Discover programme. And this is a really great way of trying to ensure that art is not just tagged on at the end of a funding call, that this is a dedicated education and public engagement programme for funding education and public engagement projects. So it's not a research funding call. It's really about, you know, whether this be a schools programme. There was a great project funded in DCU where it was working with parents on building their climate literacy. And there was 4 DESH schools involved, building the parents' climate literacy so that they were able to go home and talk and then talk to grandparents, etc. So again, it's not tagged on to a research grant. It's a bespoke piece. So yeah, kind of weave through some, but
Yeah, because that was, and actually there's some very quotable lines from this morning. It was Rosie said that the arts could be seen as the bottom feeder. You know, this could be just this tag on ideas. So definitely there's a move away from that. We're talking about it being embedded completely within the types of research that are going to be funded by Research Ireland.
yeah, and I suppose, or not even the types of research, the types of programs. Again, talking from the education and public engagement side, it's not research funding. Looking at some of then what we do ourselves, so both, I suppose, with my Science Week lead hat on, Science Week is 30 years old this year, so it's been bringing science to life as kind of the line that's used for 30 years, and very much started in classrooms. But over the past 5 years, we're trying to shift that science is culture and it's part of our lives in a daily way. It's not just an educational piece. So I suppose we recognize that a lot of scientific kind of information that we're trying to communicate is really complex and hard. And in the context of climate, it's really horrible sometimes. So, like, you know, it's quite upsetting to read. And, you know, what you were saying, but we need to look at kind of the hope element as well, or trying to engage the public in a way that they feel empowered, that they can do something, not that it's doom and gloom. So a really great way we found is working with artists across the spectrum of communicating the message. So for centuries, artists have been communicating complex ideas, through art, through different mediums. And this is, again, it's getting researchers who are the experts in the fact, working with and collaborating with together. So it's not a tag on, it's that they're working on something together, and then trying to pull in the community that they're trying to engage, that co-creation piece. So if we're trying to engage with TY students, what is it that they want to know? Why do they want to know it? How is the best way to engage them? So we've done it in multiple different ways. One piece that people may have seen last year was Mockness. I don't know if people may be aware of Mockness. They're the Galway Arts Collective. They had Alf the Newt. So he was a 20-metre giant newt puppet, but had lost his home due to biodiversity and habitat loss. So this was a really great way to communicate to the public of why Alf has popped up on the streets of Dublin. He took over Capel Street in the middle of Science Week, and it was like, well, why? And it got that kind of that emotive piece. It was bringing the emotion in, where we were able to try and communicate the hard science of what is happening in the Burren, what's happening right across Ireland, and the world. But then there was that spectacle, that beauty, that brought people in. So it's you mentioned that science by stealth earlier, and that's a lot of what we do, is that science by stealth. It's, oh, come look, oh, here's the hard facts and the science. We got you now.
And so that's mobilization, and that's a type of activism, I suppose. You're bringing people on board. You're bringing different types. Cathy, does this resonate with you? I mean, do you feel that you, in your work and your practice, will have to bring people on board or mobilize it in that way?
Yeah, it came about as a very personal, my own creative ecological practice. I got a lot of knowledge tending and transforming a monoculture about alternatives, permanent ecological forestry. And with that, I noticed something else. I'm not very comfortable in big crowds or speaking in public. But I found that I live within my project. It's 2 acres of monoculture transforming into regenerating forest and native species. I asked a lawyer, how do I protect this forest in the future? I don't have children. And that led me on a way of, actually, we need to change the forest policy. So I thought, so during my PhD, I was talking to my PhD supervisor, and I said, oh, I'm spending a lot of time in forest policy groups, and what's happening to me? Should I be doing this? But what was happening was that my agency was growing with me. So I've put contributions into forest policy towards continuous cover forest policy 10 years ago. I've been asked to talk about values for arts and heritage policy, about the Earth Charter being something fundamental that we should all know, because there was talk today about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We've had the Earth Charter, and it's going to be celebrating its 25th anniversary in a couple of months' time. And so many people don't know that from the 70s, people have been wanting, at very high levels, but also from, I suppose, just grassroots, how do we talk about environmental and social things together? So, but the other thing about, I come from a background in science, and I'll be talking to you later about some funding opportunities.
Steady on, join the queue.
When the camera's off.
Yeah. But what I find is that when I was at Art College in 2009, there was Leonardo, which is an art and science magazine. It's been around for over 60 years, I think. And there was some quite well-known thinkers at that, and they were saying, be careful about using the word climate. You'll alienate people. And what did I find? That all of our policy is about climate action. Even in the Arts Council, it's climate action. So this is my feeling that we needed to broaden that out to thinking about ecological ideas and insights. And I can give you an example that in County Carlow, I went to a local hall in a little village. There was a lot of creative climate funding coming to the county. And there was a person working really hard from the local authority explaining, could put panels on your sports club and all that. And she said, this is how we can work for climate action. And there was a middle-aged woman sitting next to me and said, I don't understand climate. I think I can help in community gardens. And I think this is where I've worked with poets and people who are we've got some amazing people in literature and poetry in Ireland who can really help us rework that ideas of accessible language. And I've been lucky enough in the last year to go into local authorities to say we need to think about our language in better, more inclusive ways.
Yeah, and that resonates with earlier discussions as well today. I mean, this idea of language, language isn't enough, or we need to change the whole language around stewardship and invasive species, etc., as was discussed earlier, and this idea. And in your case as well, Eileen, do you think this mobilization aspect is a big part of what you're doing, or broadly activism, but it's more about moving people towards action, I suppose?
Yeah, I think it ties in a lot with but I working primarily in my kind of with my educator hat on, um, facilitating a student's experience coming into the burn. And the majority of the students don't stay in the burn forever. So I suppose it's kind of a two-prong approach. It's one, kind of acknowledging that they're coming into the burn and that they do want to feel part of place and they want to kind of contribute to the place that they have now called their temporary community. But it's also about how we would develop a toolkit of kind of deep place embeddedness that they can ideally then kind of take on to a residency or back to their hometown, that they feel a sense of agency or empowerment. Um, to kind of move forward through artistic practices. And we've given them, a number of key strategies through citizen science engagements. We would be, because we're coastal, we have the luxury of kind of working with initiatives that are already in place, such as the Adopt a Rock Pool and Coast Watch Survey Ireland, where we can actively contribute to citizen science data collection and identification, and kind of report back. And it is light touch, but then we go back into the studios and we start talking, right? Okay, well, what's disturbing about what we found in addition to all of the diversity and the beauty. We're also looking at a lot of commercial marine plastic contamination washing up on the shore. Where we are in Galway Bay, a lot of it gets funneled in towards Fenor Beach. And so, yes, we're part of a cleanup and we're monitoring the river for nitrates as it's going into the sea. But now what do we do with that information? Okay, we've cleaned it up. It's coming back. How do we start to then think again about a toolkit of sorts? And one of those ways is thinking through materiality in the studio, especially, and trying to do it in a budget-friendly way. I think for students as artists, there's not a lot of income, and what we have the potential to work with. We're not talking about bronze casting, we're not talking about big plaster molds, but one of the kind of ways we've navigated maybe an emotional response to the amount of plastic that's washing up on our shores is to think through bioplastics or bioresins. So alternative material strategies that can be repurposed. You can cast with these kind of gelatin agar-agar based plastics, but it doesn't work out, melt it back down on your sauce pot, and try again. And it's in these conversations, we're looking at ways in which the material is unfixed. It has the potential to decompose quite quickly. We're looking at alternatives for petroleum-based plastics and having those difficult conversations while we're busy in the studios with our hands.
So you're not just mobilizing people; you're mobilizing materials, and the whole action needs the non-human and the human.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As artists, it's so like we are like embodying our practice, especially, being embedded in place, embodying practice and the kind of the intimacy of working with materials in that way. We can't just put a curtain down in front of what it is we're working with in the studio every day. Like there is a relationship. Max Lieberon talks about, plastic as kin. And it was mentioned earlier, I think Luke mentioned, this lifespan of plastic being 10,000 years old. Yeah, like it's here. And there are amazing benefits that plastic has enabled for advancement of society, but there's also the legacy. And we need to learn how to think through it and with it and alternative strategies for it.
Alan James, in your case, mobilizing people, is that an important part of what you're doing and the work you do?
Yes. Um, yes. It's kind of all I do. Like well, there's two things I do. One, the only way I can learn and explore the world is by creating and doing. I'm dyslexic and I have ADHD, so I can't read it. I've never read a book. I can't do it. But I learn and explore by working with people and getting out and doing things. And then the only way I finish something with my ADHD is actually putting it in front of other people and getting people to come there. So a lot of my entire practice is about mobilizing people around ideas and conversations. Currently the project I'm working with in DCU is Diversity Together with Research Ireland and Creative Ireland. And we are bringing together disabled neurodivergent people in Cavan, Fermanagh and Dublin to explore how neurodivergent ways of thinking can support climate action. So following on from Dr. Helen Taylor's cognitive or theory of evolution, where society or evolution purposefully creates people whose brains work differently to each other, so that when you're in a group, you have a better chance of survival. You can come up with a way out if you work together. So that's kind of the bond of what is this project that we're currently working on brings us together. But also, what I found though is in mobilizing, it's extremely difficult to bring together disability communities and groups, because society has worked so hard in many years to fragment us, put us into silos, into corners, where we're all shouting for our own justice, because we're so disfranchised in the beginning. So then, and so to bringing us together is quite a feat. And I guess what else? So a lot of what we're doing is we're working on language has come up a lot today. One thing that I found was I was doing a workshop this weekend, and we were talking about a just transition. First of all, just is short for justice. So that's not plain English. It's actually, if you have intellectual disability or neurodivergent, that just is difficult in its own right. But also, a lot of disabled people have a lot of disabled people have a negative view towards that. One thing that came up was like when we're young, a lot of people be like, "Oh, don't mind that. That's just Alan, being Alan." Which is that negative undertone to it. And then when you're talking about just transition, which is devoid of any emotion, and all words is devoid of any, sorry, I'm rambling, but all words are like all climate action, climate sequestration, climate, all of these words is no emotion in it. So the projects we work on now, we're not calling them climate action projects, but climate love projects, to try and bring emotion in a little bit more. And I've rambled.
Okay, good ramble then, we love it. I think it was Walsh this morning, it said something, our allies might come from unusual places. So this idea of collaboration and bringing people on board, well, there's a big lumbering elephant in the room, Trish, isn't there? The idea, that, does this mean corporations are going to be involved, and what happens? Are we in a society where this isn't going to be always easy to bring everyone, and maybe if it is, it's tokenistic perhaps?
Yeah, Trish, can we have another panel for that, please? Yeah, and I think this has come up in questions as well around if some things can be tokenistic, if there is like a small bit of attention paid to the feel-good factor. We see it with all kinds of different forms of washing. But we're also, I vacillate on this because my area is political economy, and also just again dealing with basic facts. Sometimes I can't get over or get around the fact that the planet has biophysical limits, and any attempts to kind of like infinitely inflate a balloon are not going to work. So if we're talking, and I don't even know why it has to be an elephant in the room to talk about like a compounding growth based system, that it's just, oh well, this is what we've got, like it was always there. I sometimes find it even hard that like that is a thing that we need to negotiate around when the data is in on it. But because we're in this state that we're in, yeah, I absolutely think it needs to be all hands on deck. And while my own, like informed kind of, I guess, decisions around what ways I do research and what I do research on would certainly be focusing on post-growth perspectives, particularly in the global north. Um, you have the Jevons paradox that any kind of increases in efficiency will be offset in increases in use. You have uh, kind of evidence against decoupling growth from material and energy use. Even stuff that came up about the green transition being still very, very material, and kind of, do we have to turn the earth inside out to dredge the ocean beds to get the just transition under conditions of compounding economic growth? Probably. But if we take a more holistic perspective, maybe it can be mitigated somewhat. So I vacillate, quite honestly, between there is this set of facts, and again, to bring back planetary boundaries, because for me it's not about climate. If the climate issue was solved in the morning, somebody waved a magic wand and said, actually, folks, it's grand, the earth isn't warming anymore, we've sorted it. There are 8 more planetary boundaries: ocean acidification, land use change, blah blah blah, all of those planetary boundaries. And there are 6 out of 9 that we're breaching because of human activity. So there's all of that data that we need to kind of mobilize. But at this stage, the more people we have on board with accepting that data, I think the better. So again, I don't know, I might be rambling too,
Nope.
just info dumping now, but we have to be somewhat pragmatic and in desperate situations. We can take a line on something and say, maybe we don't want people with their phallic rockets going into space and colonizing Mars when we have a perfectly good planet here. We just need to look after it. But we can also be inclusive in that as well.
But surely then art can definitely rebel and protest and help us to stay, call it out and stop it if need.
Yeah, I don't even know if it's rebelling or protest, or like these words. I sound like I hate words. I don't, but they're very clunky. Even this idea of activism, like, it comes from acting and action and agency and going, can we just do something, please? And I know a couple of my images are up there. So I have this intellectual knowledge around all of this stuff. And then it's like, well, what the hell do I do with my few little skills? I am not going to single-handedly solve our 6 planetary boundary issues, but is there something else I can do apart from the journal articles or something to communicate that interconnectedness, to communicate the fact that the planet is wonderful and beautiful, and for the most part, like, looks after all of our needs and has done for, as I said, the entirety of the Holocene.
Okay, I'm gonna go to questions in a minute, but sorry, class. Yes, round of applause. And another concept that came up today is the idea of hope, right? But I'm wondering that maybe the arts are seen as some way. Okay, so that as climate scientists are despairing, can you get us out of this mess, artists, or can art deliver a way? So maybe I'll ask you first, Rebecca, just from even again the interdisciplinary funding perspective. Like you mentioned here already from the public engagement stuff you're doing, you do see aspects of hope.
Yeah, I think it's the internal positive in me where I'm like, there has to be hope. But I don't think it's, the climate scientists being despairing and the artists being the hope. They have to be together. It's not, these silos that were spoken about, that, it's together, maybe the hope for the public. And again, with that public hat on it, of comes through looking at the art that, it's or engaging, not looking, I suppose, engaging and being part of that brings hope. Because I think ultimately, if there's no hope, it's going to be like, well, what am I going to do? It's, we have to have hope to be able to do something. And with the little skills I have, I would like to be able to do something. So maybe a bit of that for me is a little bit of hope is one of my skills. So I'm going to hold on to it.
Cathy, for you as well, what's your concept, the conceptualization, I suppose, of hope?
I find it difficult because sometimes there'll be a school of thought, and some speakers and writers have talked about hope can be a bit of a get-out clause. Somebody else will look after it, the politicians, the environmentalists, I'm too busy, all of that thing. And then there's, of course, I suppose that myself, I would be pessimistic and optimistic at the same time. Some of the work that I'm doing is a very slow art practice. It'll take a couple of 100 years to restore a forest. So it's this paradox of the times that we're in, is that we need to slow down um, and rethink our way in the world. Another thing that hasn't come up today but is quite true, Professor Karen O'Brien, a climate scientist with the IPCC, I think she gave a talk to the EPA just recently. I've missed that. I'll look at it again on YouTube. But I follow her quite closely because she wrote, in collaboration with other scientists, she's on the International Panel for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. And in December, she wrote a report that she didn't think was going to get through. And there was real deep acknowledgement that we need to look at cosmologies from Indigenous people and look at narratives, not just words. So I'm starting to look and consider that I was so fortunate to grow up in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Generally, when I give a public talk, I give thanks to the forest, the people, and my ancestors. And it's here too. It's here in Ireland. The Upsurgeon language, there have been people who have been, Wankan Magan, have been activating people to think about the ecological wisdom embedded in that. So I think there's exciting things going on to think, how do we get to this arc of eco-literacy where we see all life as sacred and we're comfortable about loving and caring about this. So, and I think that's where I feel more comfortable about being away from academia, where I can be a bit freer and hang out with the artists.
It's more fun. Eileen, maybe an idea of hope as well in your case. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I'm looking at hope in response to particularly the ways in which we're given so much climate data and climate science. And it is filtered a lot through media. And I think as human beings, right, we tend to have a negativity bias, right? We're problem solvers. We're looking for the problem to identify it in order to resolve it. The old saying, like, if 99 things have gone well and there's one that hasn't, you look at the one thing, right? And so I think as human beings, we can have a disposition to look towards the negative. And we need to be aware of what's happening, what's changing, and we need to understand the data in real time. But I think in each of those instances, we also need to be looking for the ways in which solutions are being enacted across the world, right? Ellen Kelsey talks about being conscious of the good climate stories as well. There are solutions that are happening. There are people that are active. There are communities that are kind of moving through really resilient practices. Bioregioning is coming, not as an ideology, but as an active embedded practice is coming back into conversation. So there's a lot that's happening. And, kind of like Rosie was mentioning, Rebecca Solnit earlier, there is a space that is undetermined at the moment. And if we are directing kind of our continual, doom and gloom trajectory, that is where we're going to end up. We also need to be kind of conscious of the potential for coming together. Rebecca Solnit talks about how that kind of climate-driven doom narrative exists in the media, but there's other ways in which we engage collectively together, and we all do it. Like through, bringing soup to a friend, through religious organizations, through community, through artistic practice. There are so many ways that are kind of non-capitalist, non-commercial driven ways of engaging with place, with community, with each other. And we need to pay attention to those ways of being as well.
Okay, thank you, Alan. Anything there on hope? This hope.
Hope is a word I don't understand. I don't quite get it. And actually, I've always been I'm often asked this question around what about hope, and I guess that's just my dyslexia, and it's like or my autism, which I actually just don't understand it. But the way my brain works, and this is kind of to answer that, like my brain sees I guess for me, I can answer it in terms of like need and want. Like I need to actively engage in climate love, because I have special interest in the planet, and since I'm a kid, if I'm not working in it, my life does not make sense. and then I want to further work in it. So I need to kind of to create. I see lots of nuanced patterns of ways to kind of engage and explore and further climate education and love. Which brings me to working with projects like Insight here in UCE. But sorry, I guess I don't understand what hope is. I don't know what that word means. But I need to, because my brain doesn't have any other way of working, to work in this, and I want to. Is that the answer? I don't know.
Okay, it certainly does. I will have some questions that also will add to that, I think, if anyone has any. I see one up at the very back there, first of all, and another one here. Okay. It's up there. Way, way, way up there.
Thank you. Hi, thank you very much. It's been a really interesting talk. Thank you. I'm a writer and illustrator, and one of my pet hates is this perceived division between art and science, as if they exist separately. So this is for anybody or all of the panel if you want. If you could change one thing about how climate change has been communicated over the last 30, 40 years, what would it be?
Might just send it to one or two people. Or whoever's the fastest to answer that.
Mine is easy. Mine is quick, more accessible. Put it like climate ISL, easy reads, know before you goes. Make it accessible for people who don't speak this type of climate language as their first language.
Any other quick, Cathy? Yes.
I'm always intrigued that the Earth Charter doesn't use the word climate change. It's been around for a long time, but the universal values, the common causes that we want to look after society and environment and peace, gender, address all of those things. It doesn't mention climate change. I think it's great.
Yeah, thank you. Question here as well. Just there, yeah.
Hi, my question question and comments are about both hope and communication. So I'm one of Irish Doctors for the Environment, a charity, and I guess you do think about communication. It came up in our group chat during the week a link to a Nature article about climate change's silent 89%, showing that like in, I think a Gallup poll of over 130,000 people, that 89% of people globally constituting the populations that produce 96% of all emissions want the governments to do more. But there's a systematic error whereby each of those people who can't read what's going on in the minds of people next to them thinks that their neighbors don't care as much as them. And so this leads to pessimism. But this pessimism probably comes from the fossil fuel industry, which always meant that they always knew that 50 years on, when the denial was overcome and the truth was out, the next message to give was despair, so that we'd all think, well, now we know, but it's too late to do anything. So that also allows business as usual. So I guess there was a call out about that there could be a social tipping point if everybody amongst the 89 knew that they weren't alone. And so I guess I think they've started Project 89 to tell the stories of the people, but there's also a call to the world's media to say during Earth Week or in the week before COP, to get into the newsroom and to get over the notion and lie that it's a hot topic or a divisive topic, that in actual fact there's just a democratic deficit between what people want and what the governments are doing, where people aren't empowered to know that they're neighbours. Like, I think if you thought the person next to you had a 90% chance of agreeing with you, you would engage in those conversations. So I guess the question is, like, how can we, I haven't heard anything in the Irish media or anything about how we can leverage the knowledge that we are part of a global movement who cares about each other and the world. And the second thing on hope is, I really like, I think it depends what you mean by hope. I really like hope as defined by Joanna Macy, the eco-activist, who says there are three stories of our time: despair or denial, or active hope, which is not like the passive hope of waiting to see how it turns out, but taking action with intention in a kind of Buddhist way of like letting go of the outcome. You don't wait till it's good enough. Like, you just go and do the right thing and you meet You're like the hobbits in Lord of the Rings. You meet your tribe and you overcome the big baddies, but you're part of a much better story then. Because I guess what the fossil fuel hope is that we will despair. And I think the most hopeful thing that's happened is that we've just learned that 90% of the world, we're all the same and we all want it. So I don't know what, as you said, the actors, what can we do? This is really hopeful. And I just, in case you didn't know, is also, I only heard about it a few days ago and it just really excites me.
Kate, any responses?
Yes, I've been reading about it recently, and there's a really great resource organisation, the Common Cause Foundation, that has been looking at that very fact about how many people underestimate what their neighbours are thinking. So, and they have graphics, they've got posters, they've got the narratives that we should be sharing. They're a great resource. They're looking at from hope and these ideas as a cultural construct, but as I've mentioned, you could be looking at from a spiritual faith as well. So there's lots of different ways.
Okay, and Trish, very last word for you. Okay.
Very quickly, I'm currently reading a book called Hope for Cynics, which takes in Eileen's point about the negativity bias, that our brains are basically like Velcro for the bad and Teflon for the good, to quote Rick Hansen, who's a neuropsychologist. But also that like becoming cynical with all the negative news, which does lead with things, is not kind of applying curiosity. So the author of the book talks about skeptical hope, that we look at things like that are based in evidence, like all the people gathered here with this kind of agenda in mind, all the people doing stuff in the world. So we have skeptical hope rather than just kind of just descending into cynicism because of our negativity bias. So I just thought I'm only reading it now, but I think it's going to be a good one.
More reading to be done on active hope and skeptical hope. I'd love to keep this going. We have to wrap up. We're already running over. So I would love to thank Eileen Hutton and James Burns, Cathy Fitzgerald, Trish Morgan and Rebecca Wills. Thank you very much indeed.